"Look at him," she said, loud enough for 3 tables to hear before I even turned around. 25 years later, and he still dresses like he's about to go pour concrete somewhere. Her friends laughed, the way people laugh when they've already decided who the joke is on before anyone said anything funny. I finished stirring my coffee, set the spoon down, and only then looked up. That was Katie, my ex-wife, and that single sentence is exactly why this story matters. By the end of that night, everything she thought she knew about me and about herself would be turned completely upside down. The ballroom was doing what reunion ballrooms always do. Low chandelier light, a jazz trio near the bar, name tags with faded yearbook photos making everyone look like strangers wearing their own faces from 25 years ago. I'd been there 10 minutes, long enough to shake 4 hands and hug Angela twice, before Katie found me. She always had a gift for finding the exact moment a room was listening. "Katie," I said, even, not cold. "Peter," she said back, testing whether the word still carried its old weight. She looked good, she always did, but there was a new practiced confidence I didn't remember. "You didn't RSVP," she said. "Half of us weren't sure you'd show." "Wasn't sure myself," I admitted. "Still doing the construction thing?" she asked, glancing at my plain suit and watch like she was cataloguing evidence for a verdict she'd already reached. "Still doing the construction thing," I said. "True the way saying a river is still doing the water thing is true. My name is Peter Rush. I'm 43. If you'd asked me 8 years ago what tonight would look like, I wouldn't have guessed any of it. Not the ballroom, not the reunion, and definitely not the woman laughing at me with a new diamond ring catching the chandelier light. Before we go further, you need to know something, because it matters more than anything that happens tonight. A man's worth was never supposed to be measured by what people say about him in a room. It's measured by what he does when the room isn't looking. My father told me that on scaffolding on Saturday mornings when I was 16, sweat in my eyes, hauling lumber because that's what our family did instead of vacations. I didn't understand it then. I understand it completely now. Katie didn't know what I'd built since she left. Nobody in that ballroom did. What they knew was the guy who used to talk about building something someday, apparently still just talking, while she'd found herself a whole new life. Beside her stood a man in a suit that fit the way an expensive suit fits someone who bought it to impress people. His name was Andy Davis. What I noticed first wasn't his face, it was his eyes, landing not on mine, but on my watch. A plain steel one I'd worn 9 years, my father's. He wasn't admiring it. He was doing math with it. My grandmother used to rock on her porch in East Point and tell me, "Baby, the people who talk loudest about your failures are usually the ones most scared you're about to prove them wrong." She raised 6 kids on a cafeteria salary and never once raised her voice at another human being in 81 years. Patience wasn't the same thing as doing nothing, she'd say. It was doing everything quietly. While everyone assumed you were doing nothing at all, she was right about this too. 20 minutes before Katie found me, Angela had pulled me aside near check-in, wine glass in hand. "You made it," she said. "Half expected you to bail in the parking lot." "Considered it," I admitted. "A grown man shouldn't need a pep talk to walk into a ballroom," I said, which made her laugh, because we both knew that was exactly what I'd needed. She'd been pushing me toward this reunion for weeks. "You've spent 8 years quietly rebuilding your whole life, Peter. Go. Not to prove anything, just to close a door you never actually shut." I'd almost said no more than once. I had a good, quiet life, a house under oak trees, a wife who loved me steadily, work that mattered to the city I grew up in. I didn't need Katie's approval to know who I was, but some part of me wanted to walk back into that room once, not as the man who'd left broken, but simply as myself. Just be yourself, Angela said before drifting off. That's always been more than enough, even when you didn't believe it. I met Katie at 19, both of us working summer shifts at a hardware store, her at the register, me hauling lumber in 95-degree heat. She'd sneak me a cold soda when the manager wasn't looking. I'd save her scraps of trim wood for the birdhouses she sold at the farmer's market. She had an honest laugh back then, and I fell for her somewhere between the third soda and the fifth birdhouse. We married at 21, 60 people, folding tables, my mother's sweet tea. We stayed married 14 years through a genuinely good stretch, then a slower unraveling before she left. The first 5 years were good. Katie wanted things, a nicer house, validation from other people being impressed. Nothing wrong with wanting things. But somewhere in our late 20s, the wanting curdled into a restlessness no house or promotion ever satisfied. I kept thinking the next thing would let her exhale. It never did. Eventually, I understood that exhale had to come from inside her, and I couldn't hand it to her no matter how hard I worked. There was the year I sold my grandfather's framing tools to cover a certification program she wanted. I never told her what it cost me. There was the year I turned down a foreman promotion 2 states over because she didn't want to leave Atlanta while her sister struggled. I said yes, without hesitating, picked up side work weekends, came home with split hands, telling myself it didn't matter as long as she was happy. I found out about the affair about a year before she left. I won't dwell on it. Dwelling never built anything worth having. I stayed anyway, believing if I was patient enough, she'd eventually choose what she had. She didn't. On a Tuesday morning 8 years ago, she packed 2 suitcases and told me she'd found an apartment. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching her zip the second one shut, the house so quiet I could hear my heart beat. "Say something," she said at the door. "Drive safe," I said. She left. I didn't chase her down the driveway. I went quiet. People mistake quiet for broken. They're never the same thing. Our daughter Maya was 10 when Katie moved to Charlotte for work. For a couple of years, Maya split time between us. By high school, she asked to stay in Atlanta full-time, her friends here, her school here, and if I'm honest, so was I. Katie never once made Maya a weapon between us, and I've always respected her for that. She stayed in Charlotte almost 7 years, moving back only 3 months before that reunion. A fresh start, she told Maya. She met Andy Davis less than 6 weeks after unpacking her last box. "You're the ex," Andy finally said, extending a hand, smile not reaching his eyes. "Private equity." "Peter," I said, shaking it once. "Construction, right?" he said, like placing a confident bet. "Same graduating class," I agreed. His eyes drifted to my watch, then my plain wedding band, trying to reconcile something and failing, the way people do when the numbers refuse to add up to the story they've already decided on. I didn't know it yet, but Andy collected watches the way some men collect stories, not to wear them, but to know their worth on sight. Because in his line of work, knowing the price of things quickly was survival. What he didn't know was that my watch wasn't for sale and never had been. "We're engaged," Katie said, holding up her hand. 3 weeks now. Andy's built an incredible fund. Real estate, infrastructure, the whole portfolio. "Congratulations," I said, meaning the part where I hoped she'd found something steady, even as some tired part of me questioned how fast this had moved. I saw the room shift before I saw her. There was Teresa, in a deep emerald dress, moving through the ballroom like she belonged in every room she'd ever entered, because she did. She slid her hand into mine. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing my cheek. Client meeting ran long, a woman finalizing her protective order paperwork. I should tell you who Teresa is because it matters for everything next. She spent years as a compliance investigator for a regional banking oversight office before founding the Ashford Centre, a legal aid non-profit supporting women rebuilding their lives after divorce, abuse, or financial exploitation. Help for women quietly drained of their savings by men very good at being charming. I met her a year after my divorce on a job site where she caught a permit violation and made me fix it before lunch. We didn't date for another 8 months. Neither of us was in a hurry. We married 3 years ago. She never once needed me to prove my worth. She simply paid attention and decided for herself what she saw. "This is Teresa," I said. "My wife." "Peter," Katie said, recovering with effort. "You didn't mention your wife was—" She paused. "So lovely." "You didn't ask," I said. Teresa shook Katie's hand warmly, then turned to Andy. Something in her face changed. Small, almost nothing, a half-second flicker of recognition, smoothed instantly back into a polite smile. "Nice to meet you," she said. "Likewise," he said, already looking past her. I felt her hand tighten slightly around mine. I hadn't come expecting to be the center of anything. What I hadn't seen coming was the reunion chair, Carla Simmons stepping to the microphone. "I want to do something I wasn't planning to," she said. "But given some of what I've overheard tonight, I've changed my mind." My stomach dropped. This ballroom, this catering, the band, even the scholarship raffle for our old high school's seniors, all of it was fully funded by one of our own classmates who asked to remain anonymous. She looked directly at me. "Peter Rush funded this entire reunion. That man also funded the renovation of the rec center on Dodson Drive, and he's the reason 40 kids from our old district have full-ride scholarships to trade and engineering programs through a fund named after his father." The applause went on longer than I was comfortable with. I watched Katie's face closely. The color left it slowly, like a light dimming on a rheostat. Beside her, Andy's expression did something else, a flicker of cold recalculation, the look of a man realizing he'd been standing next to the wrong target all night. "That's you," Katie finally managed. "All of it? You paid for all of this?" "I didn't want it to be about that," I said, and meant it. She had nothing to say back. Here's the part that turns this into something with real weight. 5 weeks before that reunion, 2 women had separately come to the Ashford Centre for help. Both had recently separated from long marriages. Both had met a charming, well-dressed man within weeks of their divorces finalizing. A man who talked fast about real estate funds, moved toward engagement almost immediately, then walked away with a 5-figure investment that evaporated the moment anyone asked for paperwork. Teresa had flagged the pattern immediately and already had a file open with a detective in the financial crimes unit. What she hadn't had until that ballroom floor was a face. Now she did. She didn't make a scene. She excused herself 20 minutes later and texted the detective. "I think I just met him. Real name, maybe Andy Davis." The next morning, she worked 6 hours straight, comparing photos, drafting a statement, filing everything that afternoon, not for anything to do with Katie or me, but because it was exactly the work she did every week for women who had nobody else looking out for them. If it helps her too, fine. she told me, but I'd have filed this exact complaint if I'd seen his face at the grocery store. 4 days later, detectives arrested Andy Davis outside his apartment on charges connecting him to at least 3 victims across 2 counties. Katie called that night furious. "You couldn't just let me have this one thing," she said, voice shaking. "You had to make sure it went down at your wife's little organization." I didn't argue. There's a kind of hurt that doesn't hear reason yet, and I've learned trying to force it just makes the wound angrier. I told her I was sorry she was in pain, and meant it. 2 days later, the detective walked Katie through the full file. Bank statements showing the same pattern with 4 different women in 18 months. Messages from an entirely separate fiancé in Savannah planning a wedding the same October, unaware Katie existed. Photos of a storage unit full of watches and jewelry purchased with money from other women's divorce settlements, kept as rotating inventory for whoever he was courting next. Katie called that same night. No fury left, just an exhausted, hollowed-out quiet I recognized because I'd worn it myself once. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I said terrible things to you and Teresa, and I knew they weren't true even while saying them. I just couldn't stand that you'd been right, and I'd been that easy to fool." "You weren't fooled because you're foolish," I said. "You were fooled because he's very good at what he does. And that's a crime he committed against you, not a flaw in you." She cried for a long while, and I let her. "Will you tell Teresa I'm sorry properly?" she asked. "Tell her yourself," I said. 3 weeks later, Katie asked to take Maya and me to lunch. Nothing formal, just a diner near her mother's place. Near the end, when Maya stepped away, Katie put her hand over mine. "I spent 8 years telling myself I was fine, and you'd stayed small," she said. "It was easier than admitting I'd traded something real for the idea of something impressive, then got fooled the same way twice." "You're allowed to have gotten it wrong," I said. "That doesn't erase the good years." "Have you found it?" she asked. "What you were looking for?" "Every ordinary morning," I said. "That's usually where it's been hiding." She laughed. A real one. The first honest laugh I'd heard from her in years. The following week she met Teresa for coffee, and, whatever was said, Teresa came home lighter than she'd been in days. Maya is 17 now, applying to engineering programs. She's never said it's because of me, and I've never asked. About a week after the reunion, she mentioned, almost as an afterthought, a scholarship through the Robert Rush Memorial Fund. "I looked him up," she said. "There's barely anything online." "That's your great-grandfather," I said. "Runs in the family, huh?" she said, and I could hear the smile. I told her the truth about the fund, why I'd never mentioned it, wanting her to earn her way in, because it lit something up in her. "So I didn't actually win anything?" she asked, careful, bracing for the scholarship to feel smaller. "You did," I said quickly. "The selection committee doesn't know who applies. Your essay was the strongest one they read. I found out you'd won the same time you did." She was quiet a moment. "Okay," she said, softer. "That means a lot more knowing that." Weeks later, I stood on our back porch with coffee, looking at the oak trees toward the park. Teresa came out, wrapped in an old cardigan she refuses to replace. "Do you regret it?" I asked, filing that complaint on a night that was supposed to be just a party. "No," she said. "I'd have filed it anywhere, on any night, attached to any person. The hard part was watching Katie's face while I did it. I didn't do it to hurt her. I did it because 3 other women needed somebody too." "I know," I said. "I've never doubted that." Later, I called Angela to thank her for pushing me that night. "You knew, didn't you?" I said. I didn't know the details, she laughed. I just knew you were ready to stop carrying it alone. Your grandmother would have been proud of how you handled that room, calm as still water. Most of us take 20 years to understand what our grandmothers said. In 10 seconds, I said. That's just how wisdom works, Angela said. It waits for you. Real healing rarely arrives with fireworks. It shows up in small, deliberate choices made quietly, long before anyone's applauding. Peter didn't win that night because a room found out what he was worth. He won because he'd spent 8 quiet years building a life so steady it no longer needed anyone's approval, and because he'd chosen a partner who did the right thing whether or not anybody was clapping. Katie didn't lose that night because she got humiliated. She lost for a while because she'd gone looking for a fresh start in the arms of the first person who told her what she wanted to hear. What she found afterward, a daughter who still loved her, an ex-husband who didn't gloat, and a woman she'd been ready to call an enemy who fought for her anyway, turned out to be worth more than any fresh start ever could. That kind of peace is available to all of us. It's just built one ordinary morning at a time. If this story moved you, hit like, drop a comment about the part that stayed with you, and subscribe to Aftermath Tales so you never miss the next one. Your support keeps these stories coming, so share this with someone who needs to hear it, and we'll see you next time.